Hey everybody, what's up? It's Noah, QQ Beast Mode back. Today we have another deck tech video. The deck in question today is Dimir Control using Yorion. If we see Mr. Yorion right here, he says to have him as your companion, your starting deck contains at least 20 cards more than the minimum deck size. So we're just playing 80 cards here. We're not playing any more than 80 cards. And to be honest, as we go through the deck, we're going to try to pick up some spots where we think that we can get value from Yorion. But we're going to see that as much as we can get value from him, a lot of the times we're going to be holding up our mana. So let's dive into the deck. In our 1-drops here, we've got Bloodchief's Thirst, probably the best single mana removal in the game currently. We can kick it for 2 black and 2 colorless total, and we can destroy any creature or any planeswalker. Any planeswalker. That's great. This takes care of Ugin. This takes care of Ashiok. This takes care of, and this is in the standard format, by the way. This takes care of, we're not seeing too many other planeswalkers really. Sometimes we bump into, oh goodness gracious. I want to say Garruk, but not really. So, that's the 1-drop. Removal. 2 Cling to Dust. Cling to Dust is a very, very good card. It's a cantrip for 1 at instant speed. And we can exile a card from a graveyard. We gotta look at situations where exiling cards is gonna be important. We can talk about it now, we can talk about it as we get through some cards, but we gotta look at our matchups, right? When we're playing against Dimir Rogues, we wanna be trying to get rid of our graveyard as fast as possible against these decks. A lot of the times we're not going to be able to get rid of our graveyard fast enough to turn off the Rogue's effects. Also, I'm sorry about all those clean clothes, I just haven't folded them. Anyway, we're not going to be able to turn off Rogues fast enough with Cling, but what it does do is generally a lot of the, so in the 2 Rogue archetypes, it's either going to be Loris Rogues or it's going to be Big Rogues. Big Rogues has, oh god, what's his name? The 5-drop at flash speed, but 4 you can cast him at instant speed, flash him in, replace an unblocked rogue from your hand, not Zerath, it may be Zerath. Put it back in your hand, and if he deals combat damage to me, they can take any permanent from our graveyard and put it onto the battlefield. So, what we can do there is we can either, if we have Cling to Dust to cast without the escape cost, we can just target the card that they target so they don't get the card in response to them targeting the permanent that they want to take. Or we can do that and also escape with the escape cost. It's exile 5 other cards from my graveyard. We can try to exile as many of the value permanents, and they're going to be milling us quite a bit. So they're going to be taking our Ugins. They're going to be taking our Ashioks. They're going to be taking our Lochmere Serpents. They're going to be taking our Shark Typhoons. We wanted to get rid of those as fast as possible. So just keep in mind, Cling to Dust can also deal with, I don't really want to say cycling, because it doesn't really deal with cycling. Anything that uses Loris, it's pretty good against. Rakdos midrange. Kroxa. Great target. Boom, see you later. Ox of Agonis, see you later. Granted, you don't get the spell, you don't get to draw a card, but you do get 3 life. Better than nothing. So those are our 2 1-drops. In the 2-drops, we're going to see a lot of the utility spells. 2 Essence Scatters. Great against Mono Red. Great against Gruul. Great against Mono Green. And also, Clothis is a creature. He's a legendary enchantment creature. You cannot counter him with negate. You need Essence Scatter or you need Neutralize. Another just general counter. Speaks for itself. Dry Disruption. Pretty decent card. Does what it needs to do the majority of the time. It's as the game drags on, it becomes harder and harder to find value for this spell, unless you know your opponent's got like, you know, it's like turn 6 or something, and they're holding up like a Sublime Epiphany or a Lockmere Serpent, or they're holding up something big. Turn 8, and they're holding up an Ugin, right? You want to have this as a spell. If you don't think you're going to get value for this in 2 or 3 turns, and it forces you to miss a land drop, even though it's a tap land, just play it as a tap land. That's a much better idea. Negate. Card pretty much speaks for itself. Counter target non-creature spell. Trail of Crumbs. Great Hanj. Ugin. Ashiok. Their counters. You know the drill. Countering correct targets is a skill that takes some time. It takes understanding the deck you're playing against. It takes understanding what their outs are for victory. We need to realize what cards are worth protecting for us. That's going to take a little bit of time. So none of the cards so far Yorion can get value with. Omen of the Sea is the first card that Yorion can grab value with. This card is at flash speed. Realize that you don't have to slam it on your turn unless you have a ton of mana to spend and you're looking for a spell to cast at sorcery speed your turn. If not, just pass the turn, play it at the end of their turn, or play it in response to them casting a spell if you're digging for a counter or if you're digging for removal. Kind of the only times I will not play this card at the end of their turn with mana open. Another thing to realize, instead of putting Yorion to my hand and having like 2 mana open, let's say I have 5 mana on the field. I'll keep the 5 mana up, I'll hold up a 2-drop, and then I'll sack Omen of the Sea at end of my turn. Getting out Yorion is very clunky in this deck, because a lot of the time we're holding up our mana for elimination spells, removal spells, or counter spells. Or activating Crawling Barrens. We'll get there. But you're really going to want to get Yorion into your hand and cast him in the same turn. Or if you just have 3 leftover mana and you have nothing else that you can do. Absolutely nothing else that you can do. And you want to play Yorion, obviously, when you can get value off him immediately. Duh. So the point I'm trying to say with this is, don't be afraid to crack your Omens of the Sea and say, oh, well, eventually I'm going to get value through Yorion through this. It's not going to work out that quickly, and you're probably going to leave some value on the table by not cracking these. Eliminate. Eliminate's a great spell. Reason being, it gets around Great Hanj. Great Hanj is pretty much the only +1/+1 encounters that we're going to see. Besides, and this is the huge one, in a lot of mirrors and a lot of other type of control matches in mono green food, people are running Crawling Barrens. This card is a monster. You can tap it for 1 colorless or pay 4, put 2 +1/+1 counters on it, and then you may have it become an elemental creature until end of turn. Immediately it gets counters. CMC for this is 0, so you can destroy it with Eliminate. I am always holding my Eliminates up in the mirrors or in the control matches to take care of Crawling Barrens. I'm not blowing it on something smaller. If I notice I'm playing against little rogues, if I notice I'm playing against little rogues or big rogues, I will use Eliminate and not spare it for something like Crawling Barrens, because I want to get rid of their board as fast as possible so Zerasan cannot get out and start stealing stuff from my graveyard. Heartless Act pretty much speaks for itself. Destroy target creature. We're going to make this just a little smaller. Zerasan speaks for himself. Heartless Act speaks for itself. Destroy target creature with no counters on it. Good against Questing Beast. Good against Brushfire Elemental, good against Xerath. Xerath has to deal damage to get the card. So realize that save these removals for their instants. Play them at instant speed the majority of the time, unless it's necessary to play them at sorcery speed. This kind of speaks for itself. The only time we're really removing counters are cards like Stonecoil Serpent, but I've seen a downtick in that card. Sometimes we're removing counters so that we can, if we have like 2 Heartless Axe. Very rare. Majority of the time we're just destroying target creature with no counters on it. Next up, one of my favorite cards, honestly, right now. Mazemind Tome. Very good stuff. It's hard to slam this card on 2, especially when you have counters and removal in your hand, but a lot of the times you need to get this thing going as soon as possible. So be judicious about when you slam it on 2, but a lot of the times it's going to have to be the play that you make, even if it means sacrificing missing tempo with countering a spell on their turn 2 or 3, or removing a creature on their turn 2 or 3. Because that's generally it. If our only other option is Omen of the Sea, as far as playing a 2-drop on their turn, I'm always playing Mazemind. Because it's more likely that I'm going to be able to get value then off of Mazemind plus Omen with Yorion. Because as the game goes longer, we don't want to be missing land drops. We're going to have 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 mana on the field. 8 is the first time that we can get Yorion into your hand and play him. Turn 8. So by that point, Mazemind, you might have 4 counters on it. This card is good against aggro decks. This card is good against rogues. Something against mill decks. And this is my personal preference, is if my opponent is starting to mill me, whether it be Rune Crab, Soaring Thought Thief, Thief's Guild Enforcer, Thief's Guild Agent, I will scry after all the milling is done. I'm gonna get milled anyway. We may as well just let the mill happen and then scry at the end of their turn to see what I'm gonna get, or even the draw. If I know what the top card is and I want to draw that card before it gets milled away, that's a different story. We have that info. If I don't have info what's on top of my deck, I'm going to be scrying after all the milling has been done. A lot of times too, against mirror matchups or against other control matchups, we don't need to use this thing every time we can. A lot of control decks comes down to maintaining parity with the amount of cards that we have in our hand versus our opponent's hand. You don't have to scry with this thing every time. If you can wait and not scry and pay 2 when you have another play plus paying the 2, or even if it's just paying the 2 to draw instead of scrying in the mirror matchups. If you're playing against aggro and you need to get the 4 counters on there as soon as possible to gain that 4 life, then do that. That's the better play. It's going to take some getting comfortable with the format and getting knowledgeable about standard, but you'll know when you should be pushing for the counters to get the life back, or if you can take your foot off the gas, wait a turn, not scry, and then when you have the mana, pay the mana to draw the card. It's going to be more important. So that rounds out our 2-drops. In the 3-drop territory, we have 4 copies of Neutralize, the full playset. Neutralize is one of the trickiest cards I have playing because of the cycling option. I'm not certain when to cycle sometimes, and I'm not certain when to save it for a counter. I have cycled this thing on 2 before. I've cycled this thing, generally not on 3, but I've cycled it on 4. It all depends on what else you have in your hand. If you have other counters in your hand, and if you can sneak value with Drawry Disruption, go for it. But I think most of the time we're saving this as a counter. But sometimes, especially later game, if you're digging for a Bloodchief Thirst to get rid of their Ugin, or you're digging for an Extinction event to wipe the board, or you're digging for some sort of removal, like spot removal, at instant speed, like Heartless Act or Eliminate, we're going to be cycling this card. The one I can think of mostly is Eliminate. If your opponent's coming in with the Crawling Barrens that has like 12 counters on it or something like that, that's kind of the one spot. But a card I have a tough time playing optimally, I believe, is Neutralize. But it's a great card. I think running 4, especially in an 80-card deck, is totally fine. Also in the 3-drops, Elspeth's Nightmare. A great card. It can hit a lot of different targets, rogues, It hits almost everything, unless they're beefed up with the, 2 Soaring Thought Thieves with the rogue buff, the 8 or more cards in my graveyard. But the good thing about this card, it's a cheap. It's not cheap, but it's a weak removal spell. It's Duress, and it's also Bojuka Bog for 3 mana. Exiling their graveyards are going to be pretty important in a lot of matchups, especially in the Rakdos midrange. Any decks that have the escape mechanic, it's going to be good against. At that point, too, you've also pitched a card from their hand, and you're also exiling it the next turn. This is a pretty good card. I think 2 copies is enough. I think any more than 2, it's gonna be sitting in your hand, and it's gonna be clunky. But a lot of the times with the 2 copies on your turn 3, you're gonna have a target for this, and it's okay to just fire it off. That's the 3 drops. And the 4 drops, Extinction Event. It's our only board wipe. It's a good board wipe. It exiles cards, which is good. Exiling gets around indestructibility. They go in the exile zone. They don't go in the graveyard. It shuts off Loris decks. It shuts off Kroxa. It's a good card. It's a great card. Sometimes we're gonna get filled up on it. We're gonna have 3 in our hand, and we're gonna have to spend 4 mana to get rid of 1 creature. It is what it is. It happens sometimes. Especially if you can get value off the exile, or even if you're saving some damage, it's okay to just fire it off, honestly, if you have multiple copies in your hand. If not, don't get too trigger happy, but even if you're getting a 2 for 1, it's not bad. But we want to know when is optimal to play this card. So this is another one that's kind of tricky. I see a lot of people misplaying it. Also, notice the distribution of creatures that your opponents have that have odd and even converted mana costs. If we can play Extinction Event and take out 2 cards and then have a Heartless Axe or an Eliminate Uff to take out the single odd CMC card, and after you took out 2 evens, do that. We want to be knowledgeable about what our opponent is on the field, how we can clear their entire board with the fewest amount of spells. 1 Hagra Mauling, it's enough. It's not a swamp. Swamps play an important part in this game, and we'll see why in a bit, but I think having 1 copy is totally fine. I think originally I had 2 and I pitched it for something else, which we'll get into. It may have been another card, I can't remember, but I think 1 Hagra Mauling is fine. I'm very rarely using the Destroy Creature with this. Most of the time I'm just playing it as a land. 3 copies of Solemn Simulacrum. This is another kind of tricky card to play, only because it costs 4 mana and it gets in the way of our counters and our removal, especially on turn 4. The good thing about this guy, in an 80 card deck, he thins our deck 2 times if we can get it out, and if he dies, it's a graveyard. We grab a land from our library, and we get to draw a card when he dies. Pretty good. This is another card, as with Elspeth's Nightmare, this is another card that we can get value off of Yorion. Create it, bounce him, pull another land out of our deck, not a bad deal. It is a basic land card. We only run 12 basic lands. I think that's enough, though. We just want to be cautious about slamming him directly on 4 if it gets in the way of an important counter, when we believe that our opponents are going to have a spell that's worth countering on their 5 or their 4. Something to be cautious of. 1 copy of Shadow's Verdict. I like this card. I don't know if it's correct. I generally play best of 1 format, so I don't mind having it. It completely shuts down Loris. It completely shuts down... It does a lot of damage to Gruul aggro. We take out Love Struck Beast. We take out Brushfire Elemental. The only things we're not really hitting are Questing Beast, which they're running sometimes, and what else 4-drops this girl adventure run? I can't remember off the spot, but this card, and it doesn't really mess with our creatures at all, because our lowest creature is 4 mana. So I don't know if this card is correct. This isn't. I said 4 extinction events were only board wipes. This is also a board wipe, but I'm not sure if it's correct or not. I like having 1. Not sure. 2 copies of Ashiok, Nightmare Muse. This card's great. Sometimes it can be very clunky, especially slamming it on 5. A lot of control decks is not losing so that you can win. And sometimes not losing means holding up mana so that you can counter spells or so that you can remove creatures. Which means a lot of the time we're not able to play our 4, our 5, and our 6 drops and our 8 drops on turns 4, 5, 6, or 8. Because we have to be able to play something plus have a counter behind so that we can protect what we play. A lot of the times when we tap out, it can be game over for us. Our opponent can resolve a back-breaking spell and just put us in the dumpster and have us be playing from behind. That's the beauty of control decks. They're a bit tougher to play, but when you do outmaneuver your opponent, it's super gratifying. Break down his abilities, or break down their abilities a little bit. The +1 creates a 2/3 Nightmare Creature token with whenever this creature attacks or blocks, each opponent exiles the top 2 cards in their library. This is good because exiling does not hit graveyard. You cannot recur these things. It's a 2/3 blocker, which is pretty decent. We can chump, we can protect our life total, we can protect Ashiok's loyalty counters. Excuse me, it's not bad. The -3, return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand, then that player exiles a card from their hand. I'm using this a lot. There's 2 times I'm using this ability. If my opponent has no cards in their hand and they have a powerful thing on the field, I'll bounce it to their hand and then they're forced to exile that card. Or if I'm gonna die and I need to get rid of their creature to at least try to deny a little bit of tempo and also not die, because a lot of winning in control decks is not dying so that you eventually win. That's just how control decks work. Those are the 2 times I'm using that, to either get rid of something off the battlefield and they have no cards in their hand, it gets pitched immediately into exile, or if I need to not die to protect myself, that's when I'm -3. The -7, I'm -7ing almost right when I have 7 counters. Sometimes I'll go up to 8 and then -7, so I can still keep Ashiok around, but oftentimes there's going to be so much value in their exile pile, and we have a lot of things that exile cards. Elspeth Nightmare exiles their entire graveyard. Cling to Dust exiles. Extinction Event exiles. Shadow's Verdict exiles. Ashiok exiles. Ugin exiles. All these cards exile cards, so a lot of the times we're able to play Ugins out of their exile pile. We're able to draw 6 to 9 cards. We're able to put down a bunch of huge creatures out of their stuff. And let me tell you, there's nothing better in Magic than playing your opponent's cards against them. It's one of the best feelings. That rounds up our 5 drops. On to our chunkers, 6 and above. 3 copies of Shark Typhoon. Maybe 4 is correct, but we have 3 currently. Shark Typhoon is a card that's seeing play in tons of format, and this is because it's a win con in its own, and also this, you cannot counter a cycle, so you are guaranteed a shark token, a flying shark token, and you're guaranteed to draw a card. These things are pretty good. The shark token can chump and tempo, deny some tempo from your opponent. It can kill creatures outrightly when you cycle it in before blockers are declared. It's a great card, and as I said, it's a win con in its own. If you can safely resolve Shark Typhoon or 2, and then start playing all your small spells when you're still just getting value, when you're still doing what you need to do, you're just generating tons of shark tokens, and eventually you're going to swarm your opponent. Next up, one of my favorite cards to play with right now, Sublime Epiphany. And before we get into Sublime Epiphany, we're gonna look at Lochmere Serpent. 2 copies of Lochmere Serpent. Lochmere Serpent is a win condition in his own. He's a 7/7 with flash, which means you can play it at instant speed. So, we can flash in Lochmere, end of turn, on their turn. We can flash in when they attack, and we can chump, or we're not chumping generally, when we can flash in and block a creature and kill one of their creatures without them knowing. When to play Lochmere is not really as important as it's a win con with its pay 1 blue, sacrifice an island. Lochmere Serpent can't be blocked this turn. Generally, at most, your opponent's going to be on a 3-turn clock when Lochmere Serpent hits the battlefield. Unfortunately, Heartless Act gets rid of it, which a lot of people are playing 4 copies of Heartless Act. It's a great card. The more important ability, I believe, is pay 1 swamp, pay 1 black mana, sacrifice a swamp, you gain 1 life and draw 1 card. This is a card draw engine, and the 1 life gain has saved me on multiple occasions against multiple decks. Against rogues, against mono red. It helps you stabilize. It gets you card advantage. It draws you into more removal. It draws you into more counters. It draws you into more Shark Typhoons. It's great. And it's a 7/7. One of the interesting, I think, underspoken parts of this card is the bottom ability. Pay 1 blue mana and 1 black mana. Exile 5 target cards from an opponent's graveyard. Return Lochmere Serpent from your graveyard to your hand. Activate this ability anytime you could cast a sorcery. This card, I think, was conceived the same time that Feasting Troll King was conceived. Feasting Troll King is a 7/6 that allows you to bring him back to the battlefield by sacrificing 3 food. This card allows us to exile cards from our opponent's graveyard. This is great against Rakdos midrange. This is great against any Loris decks. Sure, you're not always going to be able to bring him back because you may have Elspeth Nightmare his or her entire graveyard away already, so you can't bring Lochmere Serpent back. But the thing is, this thing has inevitability. You're gonna get it back eventually, if you can resolve it. Granted, we generally have a lot of other plays that we want to do, but the looming serpent in your graveyard is good. It's a good card. We're going to pop back up to Sublime Epiphany. Talk about this card a little bit. Sublime Epiphany is a 6-drop blue instant for 2 blue and 4 colorless that says choose 1 or more of these modes. They're called modes when they have the dots like that. So it's a counter spell. It can counter target activated or triggered ability. Let's talk about this a little bit. When you're in the mirror match or any match that's using Crawling Barrens, that's an activated ability. They have to activate it to put the counters on it. We can counter that so it doesn't become a creature. Return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. This one's pretty good. We can return our own stuff. We can return stuff like Omen of the Sea. We can return things that are going to die, put it back in our hands. A lot of the times we're going to be returning our opponent's stuff back to their hand to deny them tempo as well. Create a token that's a copy of target creature you control. We only have 4 potential creatures in this entire deck. We have Yorion, which if you create a copy of a legendary, it dies, so that stinks. We have Solemn. Creating a token of Solemn is not bad. We get to pull another land out of our graveyard. Sorry, 5. We have Shark tokens as well. We can create a copy of a Shark token. We can create a copy of a Nightmare token off of Ashiok. Or the creme de la creme, creating a copy of Lochmere Serpent. Granted, this takes 12 mana total, and a lot of the times you're not going to be able to do the 2 things on the same turn. But if you can create a copy of Lochmere Serpent, it's very tough for your opponent to win after that. Very, very tough. And the last thing says target player draws a card. That's always going to be us. I've never had a situation come up where I want my opponent to draw a card. The trickiest part of this card is because it has so many modes, we want to use it when we can get the most value off of it. Is that just countering a spell and drawing a card? Is that countering their activated ability or their activated Ugin ultimate? They get Ugin out, we counter their activated Ugin. Ugin goes down to 1 for them and they get nothing out of it. And we get to draw a card, and we can create a token of something that we already have, and we can bounce something that we have to our hand, like an Omen of the Sea or an Elspeth Nightmare or something like that. You're really going to have... This is the card that you have to be most judicious with. It's one of the toughest cards to play in the deck. But this card, when used properly, is backbreaking. Your opponents will concede. They'll literally concede because you'll be able to swing back with lethal, or you've just shut off their biggest value engine. You've destroyed their Crawling Barrens. It's a great card. Plus, if we have Shark Typhoon on the field, we're creating a 6/6 flying shark token. Pretty good. And one copy of everyone's favorite, Ugin the Spirit Dragon. Not much to say about Ugin. Everyone knows what he does. We're not ulting too often with him. We're not even actually getting him out that often because, as I said, this is an 80-card deck. It's only one copy. We do have a lot of scry, so we can scry into him, but resolving an 8-drop is very tough in this deck while keeping up our counters. We need to be careful when just slamming Ugin, and we also need to be careful about if our opponent is playing big rogues and they have Xerath. We don't want them getting our Ugin on turn 4. That's not a good feeling. So, we have Cling to Dust to remove our own Ugin from our graveyard sometimes. We have to do it sometimes. That is the guts of the deck. And we'll take a quick look at the land base. Castle Vantress speaks for itself. A lot of times, instead of the scrying, paying the 4 and tapping, we're going to be paying 4 to put counters on our Crawling Barrens because that is a win condition as well. But it's not a bad idea to have a Castle Vantress. There's no reason not to include one. 7 islands, 5 swamps, 4 Clearwater Murk Waters. We know the drill with that. Quick thing about these cards is if I have basic lands in my hand, I'll always play out my basic lands unless I need specific coloration. I'll play out all my basic lands. I will save the flip cards until the multimodal lands until I don't have any basic lands to play, because I want to make sure that I don't play the wrong color of the modal land and then screw myself the next turn or the next 2 turns. So I'll wait to play them. Temple of the Seat. Obviously play Temple of the Seat on turn 1 if you can. Play the tap lands when you don't need that mana on their turn. If you can afford to do that, obviously. Don't play a tap land on turn 2 when you need to play Eliminate or Heartless on their turn. Stuff like that. Just be aware. Zagoth's Triome. Once again, play it on turn 1 if you can. The good thing about this card is it has cycling 3. Late game, we're going to be cycling this. It also counts as a swamp and an island, which is relevant in the Lochmere Serpent's case. So, it's not bad. I think 3 is the perfect amount. Crawling Barrens is probably the most important land card in our deck. This card is a win con. This card can grind out other control type matchups. This card can chump creatures. Opponents forget about it sometimes and they swing in and you block and you destroy their creature and they have nothing to do after that. This card is great. As I said, it kind of conflicts with Castle Vantress as far as how we want to spend our mana. Generally, I'm putting counters on the Crawling Barrens because it's a win condition. Something to be wary of. Put 2+1/+1 counters on Crawling Barrens, then you may have it become an elemental creature until end of turn. If you're doing it on their turn and you don't need it to block, don't have it become a creature because then they can remove it with something like Eliminate. Just deny the trigger to have it become a creature, have it stay a land so they can't remove it. Something some people, I've made the mistake early on. I've played against people who did it, and then I eliminate it, and they're like, WTF, mate. And 4 Fable Passage for additional card thinning, fixing our mana. So that's pretty much the deck. It's a lot of fun for a control deck. I've had the most fun with this deck out of any deck in Standard. More fun than Temur Ramp, more fun than Groll Adventures, more fun than Big Rogues, more fun than Small Rogues, more fun than Cycling, more fun than Mono Red, more fun than Green Food. This deck gives me the most satisfaction to play, and I highly recommend it to anybody who can afford the wild cards and also want to start playing a control deck and working on their control gameplay. As far as the sideboard is concerned, 4 Mythical Disputes I took out on accident, and we can put in whatever you want. One more Skyclave. As I said, I play best of 1 mostly, so the sideboard is not that important to me. But we have things like Skyclave in there against other grindy matchups. Unless they can exile our graveyard, this card eventually becomes a win condition. Agonizing Remorse, obviously, against other control matchups. Pick their hand. Control matchup, control matchup. Bracing Borrower is pretty good against other, not control matchups, I'd say against aggro decks. We want to kind of slow them down. Additional Shark Typhoon against other control matchups, and Ugin against the Rogues, the Groll Adventures, kind of the small to mid-rangey decks where we can just play this on 8, wipe their board, and then they can't really recover. So that's the sideboard. This is the deck. Give it a shot. It's super fun. It's one of the best decks I've played in Standard. I've had multiple Standard events where I've gone 7-1, 7-0 even. I average at least about 4 wins when I play this deck. Yeah, that's pretty much it. If you stuck around till the end, thank you so very much. Please like the video. Please subscribe to my channel. I'm going to be releasing more deck videos in regards to Standard decks. We might start doing some historic stuff, but as of now, I've been just playing Standard and still kind of finessing my way around this deck. It's a blast to play. Give it a shot. Thanks for tuning in. Take care. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.